Hey guys, welcome back to another Tumbler tutorial. Today we're going to be working on this nail-inspired tumbler, and we'll link the original nail creator below so you can follow her on Instagram. We're going to start with a 24-ounce Plump from the Tipsy Magnolia, and just like last weekend, we are going to do a stripe, but we're going to do it vertical instead of horizontal this time. I'm going along the bottom with my striping assistant tool from the Amy's Make Everything, and I'm marking off probably about 1/8 of an inch, and we're going to tape that off because that's going to be spray painted white. I don't want that to be included in my vertical stripes because I don't want to have to carry the pin striping down around the bottom edge of the tumbler. Typically that causes lifting in the vinyl stripes, and I just didn't want to deal with it, so I put a white base and kind of cut off the bottom striping, if that makes sense. So we're gonna go in, and I marked out 8 stripes, so you don't want to do an odd number because then you're gonna have colors meeting up back to back, and so if we do an even number, it's going to be obviously every other. So whatever tumbler that you're using, you're just gonna split that into 8ths, and then I'm going to tape it off with my painter's tape. I did mark off every other color with just a Sharpie just to make sure I was staying on track. And of course, if you're doing colors that are very contrasting, I would always start with the darkest first and then do the lightest afterwards to prevent any cross-contamination. Today we're using all Chase Rae Glitters. I'm using about 1/3 of Mean Girls and then about 2/3 of Bodacious. We're gonna mix that up. I was trying to replicate the color in that inspo picture that I showed you in the beginning. And then using the epoxy method after spray painting, we're going to apply the pink glitter, and we're gonna fill in any gaps. This is kind of a medium chunky mix, and so it gave mostly full coverage, but I wanted to make sure there wasn't any spray paint peeking through the bottom. So I went back in after all of that medium chunky glitter was laid down with a fine cut, and we'll fill in any of those gaps. That's going to be Let's Go Party, also from Chase Rae. It's just a lighter pink, and because it was kind of a little bit transparent, it had some opal to it, it took the color underneath it and it blended in really nicely. Once we're done glittering, we're gonna go in and flatten out the glitter on a piece of printer paper. Because it's kind of a medium chunky glitter, we wanna make sure that's patted down as flat as possible. That's going to prevent or lessen the amount of epoxy that you'll have to use to get a smooth tumbler. And then once that's laid down flat, we're gonna go in and immediately remove that painter's tape. If you don't, it will dry to the epoxy and you're gonna have a whole mess on your hands. So we're gonna let that sit overnight to dry, and once that was dried, I let it sit for probably, I don't know, I would say 6 to 8 hours. Otherwise, I just let it sit overnight. Once it was dry, I did put a coat of polyacrylic over top of the glitter. That is going to prevent that from moving. And once that polyacrylic was dry to the touch, I went back over the opposite glitter. So we're taping off the pink this time, taping off the bottom again, and then we're going to spray paint the stainless steel orange, and then we're going to follow the exact same process with the pink. We're going to glitter it with the epoxy method, and then once again let it dry and cover that with polyacrylic. Once again, we're using the printer paper to roll it flat. If you do get some glitter falling off or sticking to that paper, you can just go right back over the glitter. I did have some stick to the printer paper. I just went back over it and I re-flattened it out again. That helped the glitter to like re-stick to the epoxy, and you couldn't even tell that it came off to begin with. So once again, removing the tape right away. We're gonna let it sit overnight to dry. And then I did a coat of polyacrylic over the orange, let that dry to the touch. And now we're going in with this transfer tape that I mentioned last weekend that is horrible and I use as a paint blocker. So we're just gonna cover the tumbler and tape off that bottom edge for a third time, making sure that that painter's tape is completely sealed and so we don't have any white spray paint seeping underneath that painter's tape. Once everything's taped off, we're gonna spray paint the white and use the epoxy method to glitter the bottom edge. I spray painted the entire bottom white, but I am going to go into those cavities and fill them with different glitters. You can finish it however you want to. I'm using Girl's Best Friend for the outer ring. And then we're gonna do the same process. We're gonna peel the tape, let that dry. This is UV resin, so I just threw it under my UV light for a couple of minutes. And then once that was dry, I went over the white with a coat of polyacrylic so that glitter didn't move. And then we're gonna fill in the bottom cavity with the matching pink and orange colors. So once again, we're using UV resin. You don't need very much. For the pink, I would say maybe like 5 milliliters. I mixed way too much. I definitely did not need all of this. But we're going to basically mix it till it is a tiny bit runny. You don't want it to be chunky because then it's not going to fill in that outer ring very well. It's going to come up over the sides or go into the middle. So we want it to be just a little bit runny, like this consistency here. And then what I do is I pinch my medicine cup here and it kind of works as a funnel to get it into that outer ring without making a mess on the bottom edge or getting into the center. Now, I will tell you that I've learned over the time that I've been doing glitter booties not to overfill it. You can always add more glitter and epoxy. It's really hard to clean up a mess if you overfill it, and it's really easy to overfill it. So just be cautious if you're new to glitter booties and you're doing the outer ring. It's very, very easy to overfill and seep into the center ring if you're doing different colors. So same process with the orange glitter. I did cure the pink glitter before I moved into the orange, just in case I had the orange spill into the pink. I didn't want them to cross-contaminate. So I did cure that, and then we're going in with orange and curing that. And then once everything is cured into place, we're gonna go in with our first coat of epoxy. This is Flynn Sisters Fast Setting Epoxy. I used probably, I would say 30 to 35 milliliters on this. I used a little bit more than normal because I wanted to fill in that bottom cavity, and it was also a medium chunky glitter, and so it's going to soak up more of the epoxy. So we're gonna let that spin after torching all of the micro bubbles, and I let it sit for probably about 6 hours or so. And then we're gonna go in and buff out any pokey bits. After the epoxy cured, I went in with my Dremel to sand down the top line of stainless. We want to just expose a fine line of stainless steel for the final coats of epoxy to adhere to, and then I'm going to go in with my sanding block. This first coat of epoxy pretty much covered all of the pokey glitter bits, and that is because I was preventative and I pressed down all of my glitter before it had a chance to cure. And so what we're gonna do, just kind of buff out anything around that bottom edge. That was really the pokiest part of it. And then I'm gonna go in with my 91% rubbing alcohol and just wipe away any of that epoxy dust and get it ready for the pinstriping and the florals. I'm using the white pearlescent vinyl from Teckwrap Craft, and I cut it out at 0.06 inches height by 11.5 width. That is going to be for the bottom edge as well as the vertical pinstriping. And initially I had planned on doing a light pink offset. I did it on that first strip along the bottom, and then I realized that you can't even tell the difference, and so I just decided to push the pink off to the side and went in with the white pinstriping. So we're just gonna stripe that all the way around the cup, and then we're gonna go in with the same vinyl, that white pearlescent from Teckwrap, and we're going to use that for the florals as well. With the florals, I cut them out, the biggest one being an inch, and then I varied the sizes 0.75, 0.25, and then little ones I want to say like 0.15. We're going to lay those in the pink sections. Of course, you can do whatever you want with whatever color combination that you want. And some of them I am going to kind of butt up to that pinstriping, and then I'm just going to press the seam down so I get a clean, crisp cut, and I'm going to cut it so it kind of just melts into the pinstripe, if that makes sense. So you shouldn't be able to see a gap between the pinstripe and the white flowers. And then once we've got the florals laid down, I did put another coat of polyacrylic over the entire tumbler. That is going to, if you heard that, that was my dog sneezing. That is going to kind of reinforce the vinyl. That'll keep it laid down so we can put the epoxy over it without it lifting up any of this hard work that we just did. So once that polyacrylic is dry, we're gonna start working on the centers of the daisies. Now, I took it an extra step. You don't have to do this. I glittered the orange center circles of the daisies. If you wanna just put the vinyl on it, you can definitely do that, but I love how it played into the tumbler. It matched the orange, kind of tied everything in together, and I'm really happy with it in that I took a few extra minutes to glitter those. It wasn't too big of a process, but I think it had a really big impact on the end result. If you do decide to glitter it, what we're gonna do is tape the vinyl to a surface so it's not moving. I did cut the circles out first. Normally I just glitter it and then I cut the design, whatever you're cutting in the vinyl, but I decided to do it opposite this time to see if it would work. So I put a Lean's Tack-It on it and made sure that was completely dry. You're gonna hit that with your heat gun until the glue is clear. If the glue is white, that means that it's not dry. And then we're gonna go in with the glitter of our choosing. I just took my tea sifter there and I sifted out Sherbet 2.0, which is what we used in the orange stripe. And I'm going to burnish that down and then go over it a second time with the Tack-It, hit it with the heat gun again, and then we're going to cover the glitter once more. It does not cover very well the first time, so it's almost always a necessity to do 2 coats because most of the time you can see the vinyl underneath it. And then once you burnish that down, you should be able to pull your tape and weed out your decals or whatever design that you're cutting out. I did put polyacrylic over the dots to make sure that they did not get glitter all over the tumbler that we've worked so hard to keep clean and crisp. So once that polyacrylic was dry, I just went in with tweezers, X-Acto, whatever you want to use, and hand applied those to the centers of the flowers. And once I did that, I put one more coat of polyacrylic over it just to make sure every single layer of vinyl that we're working on stayed in place, and then we'll be ready for the epoxy. So at this point, this is only our second coat of epoxy. This is Flynn Sisters regular setting epoxy, and depending on how well of a job that you did flattening out your glitter in the first portion of the tumbler, you could potentially get away with only 2 coats of epoxy. This tumbler only has 2 coats of epoxy and it's completely smooth. If you don't flatten your glitter, you're probably gonna need 3 or 4 coats. That's also going to depend on the viscosity of your epoxy. If it's not a really thick viscosity, you're probably gonna have to do a coat or 2 more than what I've done here. So we're gonna apply that epoxy, torch it to make sure none of the micro bubbles are sticking on that tumbler. And then once your final coat of epoxy is cured, you're going to work on this daisy on the bottom. Keep in mind, this is going to be the very last step in the process. You do not want to do this before you've applied all of your coats of epoxy. If you're applying epoxy over top of your rhinestones, they are going to lose their sparkle. They're going to get really dull. They'll be glossy, but they're not going to be kind of prismatic, if you will. And so this is going to be the very last step. So what we're going to do, I wanted to incorporate my acrylic logo tag into that bottom daisy. So I made that flower a little bit bigger than my 1-inch daisy that I used in my stripes, just so it didn't look really big in the center of the flower. And once I cured that logo tag in the center of it with my UV epoxy, I'm going to work on one petal at a time. So I did not apply epoxy to each petal at all at once, because I didn't want things to shift around. So I just kind of painted it on with my little rubber, I don't even know, squeegee pen thing. I have no idea what it's even called. So I'm basically just drawing that epoxy on there, and we're just going to trace over the floral with the rhinestones. I will link the rhinestones in the description box below. I'm using sizes SS 16 all the way down to, I think, SS6 is the smallest one. And just making sure that along the way we're keeping everything in place, in line, if you will, and not going outside of the florals. I wanted to make sure it really kept its shape, and so I was really kind of shifting things around as I went along. And like I mentioned, that's why I didn't put epoxy on all of the petals at one time. So I just cured each petal at a time as that petal was finished, and after that was cured, this cup is completely finished. As always, let me know what you guys thought in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you're not already, so you don't miss new content from me, and hit that bell button for future tutorial notifications. I will link all of the products below, as well as all of my social medias, and I will see you guys next weekend.